My name is Caroline Mitchell, and if there's one thing I've learned at 68 years old, it's this. Greed doesn't destroy families overnight. It destroys them slowly. Conversation by conversation. Li by li. Secret by secret. Until one day you wake up and realize the people you grew up loving now look at each other like enemies. My younger brother David stole nearly $6 million from our father before he died. And somehow, he still convinced half the family that I was the villain. Before I tell you how my own brother manipulated our dying father and nearly tore our entire family apart, make sure to subscribe. Because sometimes the people who betray you most deeply are the ones who know exactly where your heart is weakest. My father, Henry Mitchell, built his fortune in commercial construction. He started with one pickup truck and a toolbox. By the time he retired, he owned projects across 4 states. Hotels, shopping centers, office buildings. But despite his wealth, Dad remained painfully old-fashioned. He trusted family blindly, especially his son. David was 11 years younger than me. And from the moment he was born, Dad adored him in a way that sometimes hurt to watch. Not because Dad loved me less, but because David reminded him of himself. Charming, confident, risk-taking. Meanwhile, I was practical, responsible, predictable. I became an accountant. David became an entrepreneur. That word should have been everyone's first warning sign. Over the years, David jumped from business idea to business idea. Restaurants, nightclubs, crypto investments, luxury imports. Every venture somehow failed dramatically, and every failure somehow became someone else's fault. Banks, partners, the economy, bad timing. Never David. But Dad always rescued him. Always. At first it was small amounts. 10,000. 20,000, then larger. A condo payment, business debt, lawsuit settlements. By the time we reached our 60s, I realized something painful. Dad wasn't helping David anymore. He was enabling him. Then Dad got sick. Congestive heart failure. The decline was slow at first, then frighteningly fast. As his health worsened, David suddenly became much more involved. Daily visits, doctor appointments, financial discussions. At first I felt relieved. Finally I thought, my brother is stepping up. I was wrong. One evening, while helping Dad organize paperwork, I noticed several investment accounts missing from his files. When I asked about them, Dad looked confused. David's handling some restructuring for me, he explained. Restructuring. That word immediately made my stomach tighten. Dad hated financial complexity. Always had. The idea that he voluntarily handed control to David made no sense. Still, I stayed quiet. I didn't want to create stress during Dad's illness. Then came the first real red flag. Dad suddenly became anxious about money. Very anxious. Which was absurd considering his net worth exceeded $20 million. One afternoon he whispered, "I hope there's still enough left for your future." Enough left. The phrase terrified me. I immediately contacted Dad's longtime financial advisor. At first, he resisted discussing anything. Until I mentioned legal concerns. That's when everything changed. Over the previous 18 months, David had quietly persuaded Dad to authorize multiple temporary loans. Millions of dollars. Transferred gradually, always framed as short-term investments. Emergency business opportunities. Bridge financing. Dad believed every word. My hands physically shook reading the records. Nearly $6 million gone. Gone, and the worst part, most of it had already disappeared into failed investments and gambling debt. When I confronted David privately, he didn't even look ashamed. "You're overreacting," he said calmly. "It's family money anyway." Family money. As though decades of Dad's labor were some communal ATM. I demanded he repay everything immediately. David laughed. Actually laughed. "You think Dad cares more about money than his son?" That sentence haunted me. Because deep down, I feared he might be right. Dad always protected David. Always. But then something happened that changed everything. A nurse overheard David pressuring Dad to sign additional transfer authorizations while heavily medicated. Thankfully, she documented it. That documentation became critical later, because after Dad died, chaos exploded. The funeral hadn't even ended before relatives started whispering. Apparently, David had already begun preparing his narrative. According to him, I was attacking him out of jealousy. I was obsessed with inheritance. I was trying to control Dad's legacy. And disturbingly, some relatives believed him. Because charismatic people often weaponize confidence better than truthful people weaponize facts. That realization nearly broke me emotionally. I wasn't grieving privately anymore. I was grieving while defending myself. Then came the discovery that truly shattered me. David had attempted to alter portions of Dad's estate documentation weeks before his death. Forgery. Again. Family greed always escalates eventually. Always. The legal battle that followed lasted nearly 14 months. 14 exhausting months of audits, depositions, financial tracing, court hearings, and emotional devastation. During litigation, horrifying truths emerged. David wasn't merely irresponsible. He was drowning. Sports gambling, private loans, luxury spending, hidden debt. At one point, investigators discovered he owed over $2 million personally. Dad's money wasn't generosity anymore. It was survival. For David. The final court hearing remains one of the saddest moments of my life. Not because of money, because I watched my father's legacy reduced to legal warfare between his children. When the judge ruled against David, he looked genuinely stunned. As though consequences were something that only happened to other people. The court ordered partial repayment structures and asset seizures, but honestly, most of the money was already gone forever. Afterward, David blamed me for everything. "You destroyed this family," he hissed outside the courthouse. Destroyed. As though exposing theft mattered more than the theft itself. We haven't spoken in 5 years. Sometimes people ask if I miss my brother. And honestly, I miss who I thought he was. Not who he became. Today I manage the remaining family assets conservatively, quietly, the way Dad originally intended. But every time I review financial statements, I remember something painful. Trust without accountability becomes permission for exploitation, especially inside families. Before he died, Dad once told me, "Love your family generously, but never blindly." I wish he had followed his own advice sooner. Have you ever watched money completely change someone you loved? Tell me in the comments below. And if this story touched you, please like and subscribe. Because sometimes the greatest damage greed causes isn't financial. It's emotional.